I think the delay since 1999 in settling the Kosovo issue has kept extreme nationalism alive in Serbia and will continue to do so so long as it's an unsettled issue. Now, that said, do I think what's happening is the best way to do this? And my answer is no, it's not the best way to do it. This coordinated declaration of independence without Moscow and Belgrade agreeing is not what should have been done. What should have been done was an agreed solution in the Security Council, and that would have been far preferable, not just from the American point of view, but I must say also from Belgrade's perspective and from Moscow's. Because if you agree in the Security Council, the precedent, you said, is that you have to agree in the Security Council, and in the Security Council, Moscow has a veto. It seems to me that we've been driven to the current situation, one could say by recalcitrance on both sides, but I do put more of the weight of responsibility on Moscow and Belgrade, and the reason for that is that the Ahtisaari plan, which Mike referred to, is a plan that incorporates everything that Moscow ever asked for, that Belgrade ever asked for, Moscow couldn't care less, that Belgrade ever asked for in its relationships with Kosovo. The one thing that it did not give to Belgrade was no independence, and that's not actually in the plan, that's in the letter transmitting the plan. So the Ahtisaari plan was an effort by the West, a very clear effort, to concede as much as could possibly be conceded and hope that that would get Belgrade to sign on. I shouldn't comment on the lack of diplomatic skill betrayed in this effort, of putting all your cards on the table, showing them to your negotiating partner, and then expecting him to show you his best cards. It's not a very skillful maneuver, but it's what Washington and Brussels were capable of. Essentially, what Belgrade said was, thanks but no thanks, we'll pocket all those concessions, we'll expect the implementation of the Ahtisaari plan, but we will give you nothing in return. That is, Belgrade will not recognize Kosovo, but we will expect Kosovo to implement all the details of the Ahtisaari plan, right down to direct financial relations with Belgrade, even without our recognition. Well, that's not a very good deal from Prishtina's perspective, but Pristina hasn't got a choice because the Americans and the Europeans have told them, you're going to do it, whether you like it or not. Seems to me we've got to proceed on that basis. I don't think it's a very attractive basis, but as we should proceed with the Ahtisaari plan, we should proceed also on the basis of Resolution 1244. Now, you're going to hear a lot this evening, I'm sure, about Resolution 1244 and what it says and what it doesn't say. My perspective is that 1244 clearly foresees a political process of some sort by which Kosovo's final status will be decided, one way or the other. It does not say Washington, Brussels, London, Paris, all you sovereign states have no right to exercise your sovereign right to recognize another state. And I don't know anyone in Washington who thought that 1244 took Washington's right to recognize a sovereign state away and gave it to the UN Security Council. So I think there is nothing in it that prohibits proceeding, and I think it is possible to proceed even keeping 1244 in force, though that requires at least a minimum of cooperation from the Russians, from the Secretary General. Maybe not from Belgrade. there are going to be consequences, and the consequences aren't going to be pretty. And I don't like to predict violence. And if you do, people say you're threatening violence, and you have no right to threaten violence. That's no way to settle this, and that's entirely correct. Nevertheless, I think we have to recognize that just as people have worried a great deal about radicals coming to power in Belgrade, they should worry a little bit about radicals with a small r coming to power in Pristina. And I don't expect them to come to power by voting. I expect them to go to the streets. The relatively moderate politicians in Kosovo, and I think that is a earned appellation for the current prime minister, for example, who was a leader of a violent insurrection, but who has spent many years now playing by the democratic rules of the game. The relatively moderate politicians in Pristina are way out on a limb, and there are others in the wings waiting to do some very ugly things, both to them and to the Serbs of Kosovo. And I really think it's absolutely critical that NATO be ready, and that it says it's ready. And I think it's critical that it be prepared to act, and act vigorously if there are any attacks on Serbs. I do confess that I think that the Albanians of Kosovo have finally gotten it through what have been fairly thick skulls on this subject, that the treatment of Serbs in Kosovo is the most important of the standards that the international community wants enforced in Kosovo. And it's my hope that there'll be a good deal of restraint. On the question of the North, which Mike mentioned, the North is going to remain under de facto control of Belgrade. I don't see any will in the international community, after 8 years of allowing it to be controlled by Belgrade, to wrest it from Belgrade's control overnight as Kosovo declares independence. It's just not going to happen. What I think we've got to expect is that there be a fairly clear, vigorous assertion of at least symbolic UN and NATO authority. By then it'll be only NATO authority. I think it has to be made clear to Belgrade that any move towards secession on the part of the North will not be welcome. And I think it has to be made clear, just as it has to be made clear to the Albanians south of the Ibar River, that ethnic cleansing of the Serbs will prevent them from gaining what they really want, which is recognition that ethnic cleansing of the minorities in the North has to be prevented as well. Those are in part Albanians, not entirely Albanians. When it comes to Belgrade, I think we have to be somewhat self-critical about the last few years of how we've handled Belgrade. There has been a pretty intensive effort to entice Belgrade into being cooperative on the Kosovo subject. Notoriously, the Americans allowed Belgrade into Partnership for Peace without sending Mladic and Karadzic to The Hague, hoping that that would soften them up a bit. The initialing of the...
I'm going to, just so everybody knows who Mladic and Karadzic...
Mladic and Karadzic are the two most prominent, outstanding war criminals, not in The Hague, left over from the Bosnian War. The one, an officer in then the Yugoslav army, and the other a prominent politician in what we recognize today as Republika Srpska. President, if I remember correctly. Partnership for Peace, initialing of the Stabilization Association Agreement, an important agreement with the European Union that allows for a lot of privileges for Serbia, done again after years of saying they wouldn't do it without Mladic and Karadzic in The Hague done without insisting on Mladic and Karadzic going to The Hague. Then the Ahtisaari plan, which, as I said, incorporates very ample accommodation